It's a new year, 2025, here on the Monte and Wolf Show. We are here today to give you a preview of the LCK for this year. What does that mean? Well, we'll talk about the format because a lot has changed there if you haven't been catching up with the LCK. And we'll be talking about each of the individual teams. I will say, just as a teaser to the team thing we're going to be doing later, it feels really good to see a lot of these rosters, Wolf, and I think this is going to be a much more competitive year, particularly at the mid and lower tiers, than we have seen in the past.
Yeah, no, it definitely is going to be, especially when you couple it with the format changes that we have coming in this year, which do also make the lower tier teams potentially more interesting and more exciting to watch. Excuse me. So if you don't know and you haven't been following, you've been living under a rock, and you're just like, oh, it's LCK time. I guess I'll just watch spring and summer season like I did last year, and for the last, however many years it's been, like 9 years. You're a little out of date because we're not having a spring summer format anymore. They're gone completely, and it's not the winter spring summer format that the LEC has, although it is somewhat similar. We're going to have a tournament called the LCK Cup at the beginning of the year. It's actually starting this coming Wednesday, so we're going to be putting the focus on that first. It's not an LCK, and in my opinion, shouldn't be counted or recorded as such because winning it is not as prestigious as winning an LCK. That's the first tournament.
Do other people agree with you? I agree with you.
I think some people don't agree with me, and I'm not going to name any names, but there's been a lot of arguments within our talent group about whether the LCK Cup is an LCK or not. In my opinion, it's not. But anyway,
I mean, here's the thing: anything that is Fearless Draft is simply not going to be an acceptable tournament standard to hold up because it's not the way the game has always been played competitively, and it is clearly, if we're going to talk about Fearless, it uses a very different skill set for players and teams than they've ever been tested on before. So to hold it up as the same level of play historically is not really, I think, very honest.
So it is Fearless Draft, as you mentioned, for the LCK Cup. And there are two groups where basically you play against every other team in the other group. So you're hoping that the teams that you picked for your group actually succeed because that's how you get seeded into the playoff bracket. There's a play-ins tournament. Like I mentioned, it's Fearless Draft. It's kind of like this test tournament for the new patch and everything that's going on at the beginning of the year. So it feels less high stakes than the LCK. It's a little bit more fun. It's time to showcase your new roster, what it's capable of. The way I look at it is almost like a preseason tournament, where because of the Fearless Draft 2, you might be able to see a little bit wider champion pools for some players and start to really learn their personality, what they like to play, what their play style is. And then that tournament feeds into the First Stand tournament, where you'll have every single region or every major region sending teams to this tournament. There's a similar tournament in Valorant, like the lock-in tournament we had in the past, and some I don't know if that's still what it's called, but basically the same sort of idea where you have the first tournament of the year with the best teams from the first initial part of the competition coming to one region. In this case, it's going to be Korea. I think it's Brazil next year, and I don't know where the one after that's going to be, but the first one's going to be in Korea, so that's cool for us. It's going to happen in LoLEsports. And then after the First Stand tournament,
and it'll only be one team from each region.
That's right,
only one. Only the winner of the cup from Korea will be participating.
Exactly, and same with the LEC, the LCS, or
LTA. Excuse you.
Sorry. Still getting used to that.
Well, it's very intuitive, Wolf. So it's called LTA because it's League of the Americas, which, as you can see, obviously would be shortened to LTA, right? Not LOTA, not LA, LTA.
League of the Americas. America. So, back to the overarching LCK's format. After First Stand, the LCK begins. But unlike the previous format where we had 2 double round robins into playoffs, and then the spring finals and playoffs, and then MSI, and then the same thing for summer, it's actually a year-long tournament. Kind of like the Overwatch League was, or if you guys watched the old Pro League format for StarCraft 1 and StarCraft 2, it's like a year-long tournament that happens, basically all year round. And it's one tournament, not 2 broken up tournaments. So the first 2 rounds, there's 5 rounds. The first 2 rounds are going to be double round robin, kind of like a regular season, like spring season of the LCK. And then they're going to lead into a playoff type bracket, which isn't actually playoffs, that leads to MSI. It's like Road to MSI, I believe is what it's officially called. So that basically is an MSI qualifier.
Yeah, it's an MSI qualifier. Rounds 1 and 2 are basically going to be the exact same format as spring, which is just going to be the 10-team double round robin. So that will be the most like it was last year. And then you get the 6-team playoff bracket that will this one is more it's more like, so the way these playoff brackets are going to work is that there is effectively the number one, the placements are going to be very heavily weighted into the playoff bracket. So the first 2 seeds are going to play in the upper bracket, and that means whoever wins that is going to get into the finals and immediately qualify for MSI. So there's no, only the upper bracket has that double elimination. So there are really strong incentives for consistent play. And then like the LPL, you're going to see a gauntlet of all of the other seeds through the losers bracket, but those will all be one life. So basically it's like the top 2 seeds actually get double elim. Nobody else does. And you only have to win that one best of 5 to get to MSI.
Right. And then MSI will happen. There's a break for that, and a break for potentially, the Esports World Cup and that timeline. And then when you move into rounds 3 to 5, both all 10 teams will be split into 2 groups. One group is the top 5, which we often call the West Side when we describe the LCK standings, as the Legend group, and then there will be the Rise group, which I think is kind of an ironic name because you're locked into it and you can't actually rise out of it. But it's basically like Legends and then not so legendary bottom 5 teams. Then they'll play against each other in a triple round robin against each other. And they just constantly play against each other only and don't actually interact with each other. So once you're split into those groups, it's really important your standings at the end as to which group you're going to get into, because you can't get out of it. So if you're in the top group, then you're going to only play against top tier teams. If you're in the bottom group, you're only playing against the weaker teams.
And these groups are decided based off of the results in rounds 1 through 2. So basically, if you are a top 5 team in rounds 1 through 2, you get put in that group. It's very similar to LPL Summer from last year, where it got the teams got bisected into 2 groups. Now, this was great because we got to see a lot of really, really good LPL games. And I think a very valid criticism, including one that we've made about LCK, has been that there are only like a couple probably good games a week. And this is going to mean with the triple round robin between the top 5 teams that there are going to be a lot of really good games between the top 5 teams. The top 5 is looking very strong. And also what this means is, so when it comes time for the actual season playoffs, what's going to happen is that the top 4 teams of the top group are going to qualify for playoffs. The bottom team from the top group and the top 3 teams from the Rise group are going to qualify for the season play-ins. And what that means is that there are going to be 2 of those 4 teams that qualify. So it's very similar to LPL Summer from last year. And that'll get us our top 6 teams to play in the double elim bracket of the final season playoffs that will, qualify teams for Worlds.
Yeah. And that's how you become the LCK champion. There's only one playoff. There's only one title for the year. There's no longer 2 championships, unless you count the LCK Cup as an LCK, which I don't. But we'll see how that all shakes out eventually, and what gets decided on in terms of the branding for that stuff. But so there's some positives, like Monte already mentioned. We have more top level play every week after MSI, but it also means we get more of the East Side Rise teams playing against each other. But what's interesting about that is at least it means that the games are closer. They'll be less stompy. You'll have less of GenG almost perfect gaming. Brion. You'll also lose, however, the opportunities we've seen in the past for teams like Brion to upset, or a team like Kwangdong to maybe potentially get an upset. No longer Kwangdong, of course, they're the DN Freecs now, but more on that later. But yeah, you have I think opportunities in the Rise group to try to play your own style and not try to emulate the Legend group. And maybe we'll see teams really lean into and hone their specific play style and their player strengths because they have weaker opposition to play against. So there's, I feel like, a lot of improvement that can be made and some iterations that can happen because the LCK has always kind of been copy and emulate the top two teams and hope you can be as good as them, but you never will be. That's kind of what we've been doing for like the last 5 years. And honestly, years before that as well. So now I'm hoping that now that we have the separated Rise group, that they'll really lean into their playstyle a little bit more, lean into some more unique drafting, and try to improve what makes their team strong instead of just trying to copy the top teams and their players can't do it. Their champion pools don't suit it, et cetera, which we've seen so much of. Some people would argue that this means that the Rise teams get worse practice and only play against each other. But another thing to consider is that they'll probably be scrimming against the Legends group more often because they're not in that group. So it means They'll get a lot of good scrims that they wouldn't have necessarily otherwise gotten.
And I think that's actually more important because having those scrims on a regular basis is going to vastly outnumber the number of stage games that you would actually play against top tier teams. And also, as we go through the teams, I think that the average level of the LCK has risen pretty significantly this year, especially with players that are good coming back to the LCK from the LPL. And I think in general, kind of a better GMing job for a lot of these rosters. So I think a lot of fans will be happy to see the rosters, and some of those kind of bottom group games are going to be pretty good in their own right.
Yeah, I do agree. And so like we'll have a lot of games that excuse me, some of my throat today, but we'll have a lot of games that will be closer, more interesting. It's still all best of threes, by the way. In case you were wondering, we didn't go to best of ones with this format. There's going to be a lot of good and interesting series across the LCK this year, and less snompiness, probably longer LCK days of casting and watching, so it's going to be more content for everybody. We're still, our talent team is unchanged as well, and we still have the desk, we still have all that stuff, so it's going to be a good year. I'm really excited for how this format can actually create like this storyline over the year, leading to one big championship at the end. Because, I worked on the Overwatch League with you, I worked on Pro League, and having this kind of like the finals, that's your whole year, everything you did the whole year, everything you worked super hard for getting in there, with the play-ins tournament as well. Even if you were trapped in the Rise group for a really long time, you have the opportunity to prove that you improved enough and you could still make it to the finals. You could still actually win the title at the end. It's super hype. We will absolutely know the best team at the end of the year, and it's just going to be really cool to see that, and to be able to walk out of 2025 being like, this is the best team. We're sending this team to Worlds. This team, went through this grueling schedule all year long, and they're the best. They're the LCK champions. That's really cool to me.
Yeah. Look, I'm in favor of this. Obviously, I think the previous double round robin was super boring. Even though this still contains the double round robin, because the stakes of the double round robin are so high, because they seed the what is effectively the summer split, or rounds 3 through 5. I think this is going to be more impactful, and I'm excited. I'm excited about the additional like first stand international tournament. I think it sounds very fun. So this will be an interesting season, and I think this is an improvement on formats, even if it is kind of confusing, especially the summer where we get 3 games between all of the top teams is going to be great to watch.
Yeah. And I think because it's the LCK and because these teams are so good and there's so many rivalries within those top teams, look at Hanwha Life winning summer season last year, T1 GenG rivalry, Dplus versus T1 rivalry, GenG versus Dplus, like assuming Dplus makes it, right? There's all these storylines that you might think, oh, is it going to get watered down because they play against each other so much? No, because like these teams always play close against each other. It's always hype. It's going to be super fun. There's some revenge storylines that you can have when, you don't just go, oh, okay, it's T1 GenG. see you in like 8 weeks for the better one that's not in week 1, that we always talk about on the show. It's like, okay, we'll see you like in a week and a half for another one, and then we'll have another one after that. So
yeah, it always felt bad too, because they would put T1 GenG as like the first match of the season, and then you would have to wait 2 months to see it again. It just felt super annoying.
yeah, so much better. I think it will be confusing to fans for a while. It takes some time to adjust, but once they grasp it, I think that people will be very happy for this. I think people are already pretty happy. This has been announced. It's not like we're announcing this on the show. It's been out for a while, but I think when people actually see it in practice, they're gonna like it a lot.
All right. Well, as you guys know, we love our sponsors here on the Monte and Wolf Show. It's the best way to support us. And by the way, Raycon is back, and we are happy to have Raycon back. So you guys know Raycon has their everyday earbuds. These things are wonderful. And again, I just spent a month in the United States over the holidays. I was flying back, the long flight to Korea. And I will say that the active noise cancellation on the everyday earbuds is great. And I would highly recommend, because if you don't want to listen to babies crying on airplanes, I will tell you, as somebody who just traveled back with a baby who is strapped to my body crying, I could barely hear him with. So I was that guy, by the way. But I had a baby who would cry literally right in front of my face while I was walking around the airplane, trying to get him to go to sleep. And I was listening to audiobooks. And so I can confirm active noise cancellation works great on the Raycon everyday earbuds. And also, they started just half the price as other premium audio brands. They're great quality. I use mine all the time. I know you use yours a lot, Wolf. We were talking about it before we started the show.
Yeah, I mean, they're my daily earbuds now. I use them. They're always in my pocket. They're super durable as well. Like the case is really nice. They come in, it charges super fast. I find their battery life to be quite competitive with other earbuds. Like they last
32 hour battery life.
Yeah, they last a super long amount of time, so you're never really worrying about charging them. So it's honestly just quite nice to be able to use them and never really worry about if they're charged or not. And I use them when I'm in a taxi. I use them when I'm about to go to sleep, but I want to watch one more YouTube video, or watching a stream in bed or whatever. And sometimes I use them when I connect to my PlayStation, and they're useful wherever you go. And honestly, the active noise canceling, like you mentioned, has been one of the big key perks of it. And you can just like turn it on and off by like tapping it. So if you want to turn it off because you want to be able to hear your surroundings, it's just that easy to turn it off. You don't have to go into any software or anything like that. So it's been pretty convenient, and for the price, I think they're quite an incredible deal.
Yeah. They also have multi-point connectivity, which is really nice because you can like hook it up to your Switch and your phone at the same time. So if you're on a phone call or a Discord call, or you're playing your Switch and you want to listen to our great show, the Monte and Wolf Show, you can do both things at the same time. So that they've got a lot of great features, guys. Really, really excellent value. So you guys can get 15% off site-wide, so anything on the site, at buyraycon.com/M&W. That's the letters MANDW. That's 15% off at buyraycon.com/M&W. Buyraycon.com/M&W. So thank you guys for supporting our show. Really appreciate it. And we, of course, only offer you guys great products that we actually use ourselves, as we've said many times in the past. So let's talk about some of these teams, Wolf. And I want to get your take on this. Is Hanwha the best team in the LCK?
They definitely won the offseason, that's for sure. I don't think you can really debate that. They kept their LCK championship roster, except their weakest part of it, which was Doran, and upgraded him to arguably the strongest top laner we've had since his
How dare
debut.
you? Keen is the strongest top laner we've had. But anyway.
Well, I mean, Keen has had higher peaks than Zeus at times, but I feel like Zeus has been consistent. I mean, Keen was on the Freecs for a while. So I just mean in terms of like over the last 4 or 5 years, like in total, I think Zeus has been up there. Either way, like Keen wasn't available to get. Zeus was.
I'm just joking. Zeus is a great player.
Yeah, and like there's been a lot of debate and discussion about and frankly like weird vitriol spewed out about like what happened with Zeus leaving T1. And look, you could trust your source that you trust, you know, because that's what people do. They like to believe what like their worldview is. Like this person said something that I think is true, so I'm just gonna believe that instead of maybe looking at what really happened. I personally think, and you and I have talked about this a lot off of this show during the off season, that if Zeus wanted to stay with T1, if the offer was good enough, they had plenty of time to get him, and they didn't. They weren't able to do it, and now he's on Hanwha, and you know, I think he probably wanted to prove that he could be a top tier player somewhere else. A lot of players have this in their career where they're associated with a team so much that they want to go do it somewhere else and prove that they could win even without the best team, even without the most popular team, even without the like what most.
I mean, I also suspect that Zeus probably didn't want to do a bunch of the deliverables and extra things that were expected of him at T1. Because, you know, T1 has to go to the Red Bull nonsense, you know, at the end of the year. You know, they have to do all these photo shoots and everything like that. And Hanwha specifically said in their offer to him, hey, you're not going to have to do any of that stuff. You just get to play the game.
Yeah, I mean, I think that every player is different in terms of like how much they enjoy those types of fan interactions and going to those events like Red Bull. But, you know, it's not for everyone. T1 has such a robust set of sponsors and deals that they have and content pieces that they shoot. Like, it's a great thing and it's really healthy. Like, I mean,
sure.
You know,
I mean, it's good for the money and the health of the team. No, I agree with you, but I'm just saying if you have the option to not do that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, so, I mean, I think I'm not saying that, like, I just want to make it clear that I'm not saying that T1 is like burning their players out and they shouldn't be doing this. Like, this is actually how we make a sustainable, successful esports team. And in the future, like, hopefully every team will be doing stuff like this and every team will be as popular as T1 and be successful, and T1 will be even more popular than they are now as esports continues to grow. That's just part of like, that's part of the job if you're on T1. Wearing the red jersey means that like you are on the most popular esports org of all time. You are going to have both good and bad, you know, hate and love and support from fans everywhere. You're going to have as many haters as you're going to have fans. You know, that's part of wearing the red jersey. And maybe Zeus is kind of tired of that. You know, maybe he wanted to do something else. And I think he wanted to prove that he could win with a different roster and still get paid a lot of money and do less media stuff.
I think the problem with Zeus is that if you're on T1 and even if you continue to win, it's always going to be about Faker. You know what I mean? And if you are, I don't know if this is true about Zeus, but if Zeus is a player who's very concerned about his legacy and building up his own legacy, and he's very confident that he's going to be able to continue winning titles, then now it can be all about him on Hanwha Life, right? But basically every time you win with Faker on your team, everybody's like, the GOAT, the GOAT, the GOAT. And it's never about Zeus, right? So.
Yeah, that's exactly why I think he wanted to prove that he could do it somewhere else. And that might be part of why Ruler decided he wanted to try to leave GenG for a while, because it was always about Chovy. And he's like, I gotta do my own thing. And now he's back. More on that later. But yeah, I look at this Hanwha roster. I think Peanut's still incredibly strong. You know, his mechanics, like missing Sejuani ults all the time, and God, his Blitzcrank play was horrible at the kickoff event. But look, I think he's incredibly smart. I think he's great at setting up with his early pathing a lot of advantages for his team. And he's been one of the smartest junglers for a really long time. He's also
one of the best shot callers in the world. So
yeah. It's so easy to think that Zeus will just slot into this team incredibly well. And then Zeka is so multifaceted right now. Like before, he was such a I only play melee, I only play Yone, and I can't even play Azir type of player. Like I play Akali only. Like everyone called him the patch Zerg guy in 2022, but that was 2 years ago. And now he is just a well-rounded, incredibly strong mid player.
And Zeka was either the second or third best mid laner in LCK in summer, right?
Yeah.
Whether you put BDD or him second is up to you, because both of them had, I think, very strong splits, obviously behind Chovy. But this is a guy who went from an abysmal Corki player, and granted, there was the removal of the package, to like quite a good Corki player and AD mid player in summer. And he was very consistent. I do think there are still question marks about whether he is an elite control mage player, because even though his Azir has gotten better, we wouldn't be like, ooh, wow, what a great Azir player like BDD or Faker, you know what I mean? Or Chovy. So is he up to standard in a control mage meta, I think, is the question that kind of hangs over him. But honestly, even if he's just passable in a control mage meta, there are so many other threats on this team right now. The fact that you have Viper, the fact that you have Zeus, it feels like they can really adjust depending on the meta to who is going to receive resources and carry. Obviously, they're going to have to sublimate egos to a certain degree, which is something you might have to worry about. But considering that this Hanwha team won, now we can get to whether they deserve to win. My personal opinion, Wolf, is like, you replay that finals 10 times in summer and probably GenG wins 8 of them. And so I think it was a bit fluky. But they did win, and they did win with Doran, and they did win with Doran like absolutely ridiculously throwing one of the games in the finals on Camille. And now you've got Zeus, who is going to be a much greater threat in terms of carries from the top lane.
Yeah.
And, you wonder, I think there's a real question here. I think this is fair to say, is this going to be the greatest roster of all time? That's a question that's on the table for this team.
Oh yeah, that's the question that I was talking with people at the LCK about just a few days ago, because this could be like considered even a stronger super team than the super team that GenG put together, depending on if it can find that consistent success or not, and whether Peanut, if he could maintain his form throughout the year, because he's had some weird moments, right? He's made a lot of strange mistakes or misplays or missed calls in regular season games, but and internationally, of course, as well. We've seen it a lot from him, but domestically, I think he's going to be solid here. Zeus has been solid. Zeus has shown that he can play a wide versatility of champions. And unlike Doran, wins lane. Doran was kind of like the counter to Zeus a lot of the time because he's so good at weak side. But Zeus can play weak side, but he also is incredibly strong when he's given counter pick, and also can blind a lot of picks incredibly well. And was playing ranged champions like Twisted Fate and stuff like that. So I think this roster kind of has everything. You've got Viper, who isn't as known as some of the other players in the LCK at dominating lane, like Gumayusi and Keria are, but I think he can fit that niche if he needs to. Delight's an incredibly engaged support player. This team just really has it all. Like you said, the only concern is, will Zeka be able to play like a Talia, Orianna, Victor? Like, can he play Victor? It's hard to imagine Zeka playing Victor well, you know what I mean? But that might be something he has to do depending on how this meta shakes out. So that's the part where we do have to kind of keep our eyes on him. But maybe he'll just find his own way to kind of skirt around that meta and find the champions that he likes, that he's good at. So we'll have to wait and see. But I think it'd be unwise to predict anything other than Hanwha Life being our first place team. Like, if you had to pick one, when you look at these rosters, it's definitely they won the offseason easily.
And I think if you are looking at other teams, you are thinking, well, if there's adequate growth from new players, right? Then maybe, GenG has most of the same roster plus Ruler. But the question is Duro going to be good enough? And, maybe he is, maybe isn't. He was definitely a player who had a lot of upside from the support position. Like, I think if most of us would have said, hey, look, like Pleta and Duro are the up-and-coming support players on kind of bad teams within the LCK. And so they get him on board. He was a very good engaged support, particularly good on his Alistair, right? And now that he's been paired with Ruler, he will have a veteran kind of guiding him through the laning phase and helping him level up. And to GenG's credit, they prove with Delight that they can actually nurture and support the development of support players. So I think there's a lot of reason to believe that Duro will become a lot better on this team, but it's not guaranteed. And that's why, even if GenG might win the title. I don't think it's fair to predict them to win the title because we simply don't know how Duro is going to grow.
Yeah, I think there's a question of like egos as well with GenG, with Canyon, Chovy, and Ruler on this team. I don't think Keen's really a big ego type player, but where the resources go and where Canyon plays towards and how drafting is going to go does it does make you wonder, like, will there be any sort of frustration between players or any infighting? I don't think so, and they've already proven that with a stacked lineup, like they had Lehens on this roster as well in the past. They can absolutely keep it together, and that egos don't really, at least haven't so far, been a factor between these players, but we'll have to wait and see. Duro is also a very confident player. I wouldn't really call him an ego player necessarily, but he does talk a lot of smack. He's he's very confident in his abilities. I've been really impressed with his Braum so far this year, and like you said, he's pretty good on other engaged supports as well. Alistair being his most notable support that he played this year. So I'm looking forward to this roster, but I do feel like from day one, it's definitely a downgrade from Lehens and Pays. And I know a lot of people were unhappy with Lehens' performances towards the end of the year, but if you look at the year as a whole and his time on GenG as a whole, like, let's be honest, he was incredible. I mean, he almost single-handedly carried this team to win MSI.
I mean, he was MSI MVP. So
yeah. Well, I
also,
feel like
I mean, he was an important voice in shot calling as well. And so that's another hurdle I think that they have to overcome. Now, Chovy has obviously become, a shot caller in his own right, but it was really Chovy and Lehens working together on that. So the question is now, who is going to step up in shot calling on this roster? Will it be Ruler? Is an interesting question.
Yeah, that is a really good question. We don't know how much money Ruler is getting paid to be on this roster. But I think getting Duro is like,
he did sign a 3-year deal. I mean, both Chovy and Ruler signed 3-year deals, and as far as I can tell, are interested in retiring on GenG. Like, this is a long-term commitment to the GenG organization.
I think getting Duro is one of those smart moves, like getting delayed, like you said, for GenG, trying not to break the the financial regulations. And it's definitely broken, but like trying to get taxed as little as possible and trying to figure out a way to kind of budget out the roster, because you already have such an expensive Giga super team here. So I think this team has a lot of potential, and if Duro is fostered correctly, and if Ruler bounces back here, I mean, not that he had a terrible year in the LPL or anything like that, but he kind of gets to bounce back and get back into his own footing and be happy to be back in Korea. This team could be the best team in the LCK.
It is worth noting that the other question mark around GenG is Ruler's performance, because if you guys weren't watching LPL, Ruler was not the best AD carry in the LPL in 2024. He was in 2023 when JDG was close to the Golden Road, but his own individual performance did slip. He was still elite. He was still very good. But I personally believe, just having watched 20 years of esports, that it was probably just that, he wasn't on this super team anymore. Probably he was a little bit demotivated by the fact that he had to stay on this roster, whereas Knight was leaving, and they weren't going to be as good. So I think him returning to the LCK will see a return to form, but people should be aware that there is a risk that Ruler is not as good as he was. I don't personally believe that will be true. I think he will snap back into it, but he definitely didn't have the same kind of year last year that he had in 2023.
Yeah. It's been heavily rumored that Pays was offered a deal at KT Rolster, but I think it makes sense for Pays to go to the LPL because he wasn't going to make the amount of money that he could have gotten in LPL, and going to KT, for example, would just be like going to a weaker team and then also taking less money just to stay in Korea. He's still super young, so I think for him it made sense to leave the LCK, because I know that people are going to be talking about that. Why did he leave GenG? It looked like GenG had an opportunity to get Ruler back, and maybe that's what they preferred because of his legacy with the team. Not sure what went down there, to be honest, but I think, is Ruler an upgrade over Pays? Like you said, we will have to wait and see. Like, he could underperform. So I don't know yet. I'm leaning towards.
Really? Is he going to underperform relative to Pays' underperformance and the ridiculous choke jobs that Pays had during primetime playoff and Worlds matches?
I'm not ready to say he's an upgrade yet. I'm not ready to say it. We have to wait and see.
I am. He is.
I know how you feel about this because you're a big Pays anti, but
No,
let's
I
talk
just
about.
think Pays just needs to understand that he's a very good janitor, but he's not the main character. And when Pays gets main character syndrome, like he did in some of those playoff games, and he starts going in, man, that's when he loses you the game. You just can't expect Pays to be the guy, because Pays isn't the guy, and that's fine. You don't have to be the guy, but don't play like you're the guy in a final and then lose your team the games.
All right, let's move on because he's not in the LCK anymore, Monty. He can't hurt you anymore. Let's talk about T1 and how this Doran signing affects the team. So first of all, at the time, like clearly Zeus and Doran were the last of the entire Stove League, the offseason, they were the last two players. Like everything else was basically locked at that point when that mysterious agent, 3 a.m. and all this stuff is going on. They were like the last one. So if T1 lost Zeus, he would be replacing Doran, and Doran was the only last free agent top laner available, so they had to get him. There was no choice. Like T1 kind of, I think, may have made an error in not trying to woo some of the other top lane prospects during this time because they were sure they could keep Zeus and they wanted to throw everything at it. Because then they ended up with Doran only. Not to say that Doran's not a top laner, but he really, in my opinion, does not suit T1's playstyle and what they've been doing with the Zeo FGK roster for its entirety of its existence. Because they need to have this top laner who can be either counterpicked, an incredible pick to get a huge advantage there and pull resources, or the player who can sit there and basically say, I can blind anything and we can get draft advantages out of that. Doran is not that guy. He's never really been that guy. He will blind pick like a Gnar or a safe pick like a Gragas sometimes when that was the meta. But you can't just say, we're playing through Faker roaming bottom lane every game because Keria Guma have creative picks and they push and they win anymore with Doran on this team. So in my opinion, the entire identity of T1 is going to have to change. They're going to have to play a very different style, or Doran is just going to have to become Zeus, which I just don't think is going to happen in the short term. So
why didn't he just become Zeus previously? Is he an idiot, Wolf?
I think a lot of people are going to look at Doran's individual matchup history against Zeus, where he has been Zeus's father, as people like to joke, many a time. But I think that's a stylistic matchup that he's really strong into Zeus, but doesn't mean he's a better player than Zeus, and doesn't mean that he fits this role on T1. I'm excited to see T1's roster change because it's the first time in forever that they've changed it, and it's the first time in this org's history, basically, they didn't get whatever the fuck they want. They actually lost out. Like, they actually lost out, right? Like, they wanted to keep Zeus, and they couldn't keep him. And like basically T1 has always gotten whatever they want because they're the most well-funded team, obviously in Korean esports history, but they didn't get to keep Zeus this time. So now they have this new player, they have a new challenge. We haven't seen T1 put in this position in a while, and I'm really excited to see how they're going to tackle it and how they're going to try to figure this out.
I do think you bring up some good points, particularly around the blind picking and top lane, because for a lot of the year, T1 and Zeus had the highest blind pick rate of any top laner within LCK. And what this does is it allows them to counterpick support or like red side, like R5 support picks a lot of the time. And a lot of these picks were like blind Aatrox or blind TF that we saw a million times out of Zeus. And yeah, I think that it does change the way they play because Doran won't be able to do those things. But I think the question becomes like, Faker had a very good spring split last year. He was the second best mid laner in spring behind Chovy, but he had an abysmal summer split and like really bad. The meta didn't suit him. He was not able to step up into meta champions. And my question is, if the meta is bad for Faker again, then Guma is basically the only carry on this roster, right?
Yeah.
And Guma was the best and most consistent player on T1 for the entirety of 2024. But I don't think Guma was a top one carry in LCK at any point in time, right? He is a very good player, but he is not the best AD carry player. And it has been different players at different times. Like, I think we would have said, wow, Aiming was certainly great last summer, or Viper was great at certain times, right? Or Ruler when he was playing in the LCK. Or some people might have said, some people who don't understand might have said Pays. They would have been wrong. But you know,
his skill set is so unique. Like I feel like Guma UC has always
yeah.
been like the most unique AD carry player in the LCK since he's joined, because he was the guy who was like, I played Draven, before he came into the LCK, played Worlds
I mean, he's the
qualifiers.
Neela guy. He's
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
And then you consider how strong he is in lane. That's always what he and Keria have been most known for. But he's not like Viper or Ruler or Pays, where he's known for like late game carrying on hyper scaling AD carries. That's never really been his thing. Like his Zarya was considered to be quite weak compared to other top AD carries. His Jinx, for example, wasn't as strong as Defts was considered as.
I mean, his Jinx is good, but
Yeah.
it's not like his Zeri or his Ezreal, which are giant holes. I think that's the problem here, Wolf, is like it's pretty easy based off of champion pools to imagine that there could be an actually disastrous meta for T1 where you end up with the weird champion pool holes that Guma has plus Faker's champion pool holes. And then it's like, so is Doran going to pick up the slack? And people will say, wow, Doran, he won all these titles. And it's like, guys, Doran has been good, and I will give credit to Doran. So there is no doubt to Doran that Doran is the top 3 top laner in the LCK. The problem is that Keen, it goes like this. Keen and Zeus are on their own tier, then it's Doran, and then everybody else is on tiers below that. But the problem with Doran is that he has been boosted by the excellence of the teams that he's been on, right? And he has been on teams where he doesn't have to be the guy. Right.
Yeah, that was the whole point of him on GenG. When he was on GenG, he was like, everyone else is the guy but me. I'm chilling up here.
Right. And when he's on Hanwha, he doesn't have to be the guy either, because he's got Viper and Zeka on this roster, and he's got Peanut, who's just running a macro masterclass for the first 15 minutes of the game. And so I do think Doran is a good teammate. And I do think for one of the good aspects of Doran, I think will be that he will just do Faker's shot calling and like work with Faker really, really well. And I think that like in-game following and synergy will click almost immediately. But when it comes to who is going to carry this team in off metas, like Doran is not going to be able to step up in that circumstance in the way that Zeus could.
I think what's really interesting, going back to Guma's skill set, right? I was talking about he controlled lane a lot. He wasn't as known for hyperscaling, but he was so good at specific other things. Like his Xayah was randomly really good. His timings of when he would pull back feathers, like he has these clutch moments. His Caitlyn, his objective steals with Varus, for example, like these types of skills that he has where he's so on the same page with his team, like he's so clutch, right? And that's what Faker has been oftentimes, is so clutch. And it feels like this T1 roster just steals titles, you know what I mean? Like they make miracles happen all the time. And Zeus was also a miracle maker, like he would have these perfect engages, these awesome flanks. And I agree with you in that I just don't think Doran is like the miracle maker. He never really has been. Like,
I saw that Camille game, Wolf. I saw it with my eyes.
Like Doran is a punisher. Like if you make a mistake, he'll punish you, but he won't like make the clutch play that will win you the game. I mean, I'm not saying that he never has, because he's had some like crazy casts on Gragas and one team fights, with some even like good Scion plays and some Camille ults and stuff like that. But when you think about like him trying to play Quinn, you're like, ooh, or like him trying to play Akshan, you're like, you thought you were gonna be the guy and clutch it out, but you really didn't, And that's what I'm worried about. I think this T1 roster has a lot of growing pains ahead of it, and I think we have to kind of firmly put them in third place right now in terms of the offseason, what this roster looks like, because you still got 4 of the 5 core pieces. And I'm not saying that Doran is going to make this team like drop down to 5th place or anything like that, but if they can't find their footing, that could happen initially. Like they might have a weak showing at LCK Cup. I do think this team will be a top contender for sure. And like I said, I'm really excited to see how they figure this out, because T1 has always been a pretty smart team at figuring out their identity. Sometimes it takes a little while, but once they know what they're good at, they master it and they become incredibly strong at it. And maybe Doran will actually fit a niche role in this team that we don't fully understand yet. But if we contextualize it based on their Zeus version of this roster, the ZOFGK, I'm worried if they try to just adapt Doran into that same style. I don't think it'll work at all.
Yeah, I mean, they have gotten worse. There's not really another way to interpret it, in my opinion.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the other teams now. That could be contending for like the legend group. Dplus Kia getting Beryl on this team. He's rejoining Damwon, right? So back in the glory days, like he was a world champion on this roster. Is known for shot calling, right? Which has been a big problem for Dplus. You know, maybe he can be the one. That's kind of where I'm at with this. I think he's a good fit for this team. And obviously you have Shiu, who's an incredible Challengers player. I think the biggest prospect from Challengers right now, moving into the LCK. He is an incredible individual player. And you know, arguably could be compared to like Zeus's debut in terms of how hyped he is and how everyone is so looking forward to his individual performances. And he's been playing a ton of Ambessa, you know, since Kespa Cup, and he looks really strong on that pick. He's got a wide champion pool. He'll play Renekton. He can play pretty much anything, and he likes to win lane, and he dominates lane. That's kind of his thing. That's his play style. So that's a big boon because Dplus has kind of rotated some top laners around that haven't really been consistent, and I think, and haven't really been known mechanically as strong players, and Shiu really is. So now Lucid has a little bit more of a power point there on the top side. Aiming, we know, Gold King, he's just going to soak up all the money. He's going to carry later. And then Beryl can maybe help them not mess up the just not mess up the game states, like their advantages, their objective takes. I actually, weirdly enough, I think Showmaker might be the weakest player on this roster right now in terms of like what he brings to the table. Like, I think he's a better player than Beryl. Like, don't misunderstand me. Like, individually, he's a better player than Beryl, but I think Beryl brings a lot more right now. Showmaker just hasn't been dominating mid lane the way he used to, like, since really, like, 2021. Like, since 2022, he's fallen off a little bit. He's had a lot of ups and downs.
I think it honestly just depends on how burned out he is, and maybe he's feeling refreshed, because he did mention he was burned out.
He always says that, you know, like it's just such a Showmaker thing. So like, I just know there will be ups and downs for him, and I'm worried about that.
Yeah. And the Dplus roster is interesting because in the right meta, or with the right development of Shiwu and Lucid, you know, further development for Lucid, this team could be better than T1. I think the problem with T1 is basically you're looking at the fact that T1's ceiling has lowered significantly, right? The ceiling of their performance has lowered. That's just true because they have a worse player in the top lane that doesn't provide them the things that they did earlier. And even though Doran is good, you know, if Shiwu is going to live up to the hype that is coming out and he has a breakout rookie season, the thing is Dplus could actually eclipse them. And in a hyper carry bot lane meta, Dplus with aiming is going to be potentially very, very strong. And I personally believe that Beryl will fix the shot calling problems. I mean, they've been trying for years to fix this issue, and they have gone back to Beryl. Finally, they have called Beryl back because they know this is the only thing that will fix it for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think the org just knows that this makes a lot of sense, right? And they tried like Bible. They tried a lot of stuff. I mean, Kingen was shot calling on this team in the past. They tried everything.
Moham, Kellen.
Yeah. I mean, Kellen wasn't really, unfortunately, fixing anything for this team when he wasn't playing Renata. But I think they could contest for third place. But also, I will warn Damwon fans out there who've been following since the old days.
I mean, they could be terrible.
This team could bomb big. Like, this team could really bomb. Like, Shiu might, you know, it's the Challengers thing where a player gets hyped up, shows up in the LCK, realizes, hey, the LCK is not fucking around. You know, this is actually really hard, and like, you know, you can't make those same carry plays. You might actually overextend or think you've got an advantage, and then be up against somebody like Keen, or even like Dudu, who just is like, no, I've seen this 1,000 times. I actually win this every time, and like, you still have some learning.
Beryl also could have no mechanics and just lose lane every time, and then your main carry, who is aiming, like, they are going to be very aiming reliant, and if aiming just gets dumpstered in lane because Beryl is terrible, and you don't even get to use his shot calling in the late game if you just get rolled in the first 15 minutes. So there's that concern as well. And
then Showmaker is kind of a coin flip. Now, I think if Beryl gets to roam and aiming just gets to farm and like just play weak side bottom, like that's the dream, right? Beryl like helps Showmaker out. They've got some synergy going. Lucid's working with Showmaker. Showmaker gets ahead.
I'll sell you the dream of this. Okay, Wolf. It's aiming playing Ezreal, farming under turret, while Beryl roams the map and Showmaker's on Twisted Fate, and they're just like chain ganking top side, and she was really fed. That's the dream. If
Yeah,
you're,
no,
if you're a
I
D
think
plus fan.
that scenario might occur, and I think that's like how Dplus should try to approach a lot of these drafts. But again, it could be they could be terrible. Because that's just the Dplus way, and that's the barrel way. But I'm going cautiously optimistic about this roster. KT, I guess we
Wait,
should talk
before we
about.
do that, we do have another sponsor
Well, of
this
course,
week,
yeah.
Wolf, and that is Factor. They're back. I did enjoy some Factor while I was back in the United States over Christmas. So once again, I can tell you this is a great product. And also, especially with the new year coming up, you may have some New Year's resolutions. And if you want to improve your nutrition this year, Factor has chef-made gourmet meals that make eating well easy. They're dietitian approved, ready to heat and eat in 2 minutes, so you can fuel right and feel great no matter what life throws at you. So what Factor does, guys, is they send you a box every week. That box has cold packs in it, not to freeze, but just to keep your meals fresh when you arrive. You just put them in your refrigerator. So everything arrives fresh. And they have 40 options every week across 8 dietary preferences. That includes vegetarian, keto, calorie smart, protein plus, if you're trying to get those gains. Tons of different options, and they cycled them every week, so you're not getting the same meals, which is very helpful. And you can add additional things to your box, like smoothies, breakfast, grab-and-go snacks, more add-ons, protein shakes. I know they do too that were really good that I've had in the past. So Factor just makes your life a whole lot easier. It's also going to be cheaper and most likely better for you than ordering out all the time.
Yeah.
So you can just set how many meals you want per week. If you have a week you need to skip, you could just say, hey, I'm going on vacation this week. I'm not going to be around. It'll just skip to the next week. It's extremely convenient and very economical. Also, they do this in a bunch of, it's not only the US and Canada now. I've noticed they've expanded to a bunch of European countries. So if you're in places like the UK, I guess technically you British people aren't European anymore or whatever, but you know, whatever. They're in the UK. They're in the Netherlands and some other, I think some of the Nordic countries as well. So you guys might want to go ahead and check it out if you are in Europe, because that it's available. I wish it was available here in Korea for us, Wolf. That would make my life much easier.
I wish I could get it here too. Look, if you're a gamer, like most of you definitely are. In fact, probably all of you are. If you're a gamer and you're single and you're either busy because you're gaming or you have like a tough job and you don't have that much time, it's really easy to slip into this cycle of just ordering food to your house or going to fast food on your way home for work or whatever. And then, you know, you might look at yourself and be like, why am I not healthy? Like, why am I, you know, I'm not, it's tough to lose weight. Like, you don't even have to go to the gym if you want to lose a few pounds. Just get Factor, get some healthy meals. It's there for you. It's really easy to heat up and eat it. Put it in your fridge, and then you always have it. And you never have to go, oh no, I didn't go to the grocery store. I have no food. I don't know what to do. I'm a gamer. I was too busy gaming, and now I'm in trouble.
Exactly.
And you'll feel better. I promise you.
Exactly. So you guys should eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/MonteWolf50off. That's 50 off. And use code MonteWolf50off to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's code MonteWolf50off at factormeals.com/MonteWolf50off to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. It's great. Give it a try. It's a great deal, so you might as well try it, would be my argument.
Yeah, for real.
You might as well just try it. You guys will enjoy it. Lots of good options there. I've enjoyed it very much myself. All right. So you want to talk about KT?
Yeah, let's talk about KT. I'm kind of going down the list of like where teams likely will end up in terms of the standings.
Got it. Okay, so KT, I will admit, I was sad to not see Pace signed to this roster.
Wow, even you?
Even me. Well, see, my slight distaste for Pays is greater than my extreme distaste for Dokdam. So,
look, I've obviously been probably one of Dokdam's biggest supporters for a while. But it's not right now. Let's say after some performances from him overseas, I think he can be honed into a strong talent. Obviously, he's had some really high highs. But a lot of that was during like the Aphelios meta, which is his most iconic champion. We haven't seen Aphelios in pro play in a really long time. He just hasn't been relevant because he doesn't dominate lane. He's got great gank assist. He's got great late game scaling, and team fighting, but he just isn't able to get control of a lane, and he doesn't come online fast enough to really pop off in team fights. He's a little bit slow. So while he could have maybe had a niche role in lane swap meta with the crescendum and how you can quickly take out turrets and stuff like that, it just doesn't work that way in the first few levels for him. It's just really hard to find that champion's role right now. And outside of that, Duckdom's had like a pretty good Ezreal. He's had a decent Kai'Sa, but he just isn't a wow factor player right now. So we'll see what his performance is going to look like, but he's the biggest hole, I think, in this roster. Wei is an incredible player. He's a really strong support player. He's one of the best from challengers. He was alongside Hype, who's actually going to be on loan to Bro. We'll talk more about that later. But Wei and Hype were super strong together, and if Duckdom can be serviceable and Wei can set him up a lot, maybe he can end up coming out of lanes with big advantages and then hit those mid-game spikes and become a big factor to deal with. BDD, incredible player, really, really strong performances last year. Almost got KT to Worlds, which would have meant we'd have a completely different history. We wouldn't be looking at T1 as defending champions back to back. Cuz veteran, one of the best jungle players in the LCK. Perfect has improved a lot. I kind of put him in the same box.
He did show a lot of growth last year.
But I put him in the same box as Duckdom, where I'm like, not necessarily reliable yet, but has proven that at times he can be. So we know he has it in him, but whether that shows up on a consistent basis to get you into the legend group or to get you into the spot above teams like Bro is still up for debate. If they had gotten Pays, I think this roster is like definitely going to legend. If they had gotten Hype and not just loaned him for some reason, maybe they're just not ready to trust him yet. I think this roster would be in a much better spot.
I mean, having a full rookie bot lane is a pretty big risk, I think.
It is a risk, and that's why they went with Duckdom. But, Hype has already proven through challenges and also through Caspa Cup that, we can hang with the big boys. So, I mean, and he did it with Palu in Caspa Cup. So, while Palu's not a rookie anymore, he's still very new and hasn't found any success.
Yeah, that is interesting. Why do you think they didn't want to have him on this roster?
I don't know. Like, weirdly, this might actually be the case. I don't know, because I don't know how much money Bro spent. But they might have just been able to say it's more cost efficient to get Duckdom because he's desperate to come back to Korea and sell Hype off, like loan him, and might have been able to make a profit. That's unlikely, but you can cut your loss and get a veteran player in Duckdom for a big discount if Hype goes over to Bro. So maybe that's what happened there, or maybe Wei and Hype actually don't get along. Maybe Wei is like, I don't want to play with this guy anymore. It's something weird like that, right? Because it just doesn't make sense that they would have also been looking for Pays and then been like, nah, I guess we get Duckdom. Like, you could have saved a lot more money and gotten Hype. It's strange. It doesn't make a ton of sense to me. It's been a mystery we've all been trying to solve over the last few weeks. I mean, basically, as soon as Hype was announced to be on loan to Bro, everyone's been scratching their heads about it. But time will tell. Maybe Duckdom trialed with the team and played with Wei a lot, and scrimmed, and then they were like, this guy's good with us. We like this.
What's interesting is that Duckdom was like okay on FBX, but a lot of the FBX hype that was in spring was about Milky Way and Life's synergy with him. So a lot of the games that Duckdom was playing, he was just kind of left alone in the bot side, whereas Life was just wandering around the map helping Milky Way at all times. So maybe they think there's going to be that kind of match and they're just going to leave Duckdom on the bot side. There's a couple interesting things that have happened with KT. First off, the Cuz BDD reunion is actually huge because that was part of the core that made KT so interesting in 2023. And also these players just go way back to playing on King Zone together. Like, they have so many years across many teams of playing together, and they have great synergy. And Cuz was like actually the only good part of the Freecs last year and was their kind of main win condition. So it's good to see him back on KT. And also, they brought Score into coach. So the legendary heart of KT League of Legends has made his way back to KT as coach. He is a good coach. I know that GenG thought that he did a very good job when he was coaching with them. He took a little bit of a break last year, but he's back, and I'm very excited to see that as well. So KT, I think, does If this roster had pays, you might be saying, can this roster be like top 3? Is that possible? With Dokdam, I'm a little more suspicious. But it feels like they probably will be top 5.
Yeah. I think the team that they're contesting most with is actually Bro. I think we could talk about Bro now. Yeah, this is my
Not
take.
Nongshim?
No, not Nongshim. And we can do Nongshim after this, and we can kind of debate it. But Bro won Kespa Cup. Now remember, there's a big caveat in that a lot of these teams are not playing with full rosters.
Yes,
but
they did beat Dplus, who is playing with their full roster.
Yes. And they beat GenG, who's playing with some of their strong players that are on that team. Now, Bro played around Hambach and Closer incredibly well. And Closer is the same player he always was, which means he has got a lot of mechanics. He loves to play like Akali and plays a lot of melee champions really well, or explosive like 80 picks like Tristana. But then like doesn't have great map reads, and his macro isn't very strong. And
Closer is still the same guy. He's the same guy that no one has ever been excited to watch play League of Legends.
So he and Hambach, though, found a synergy to get him snowballed. The early games for Bro are really reminiscent of like 2021 Bro, where Umpty is making big plays early and getting them these big snowball leads, and then they don't know what to do with them, and then they fall apart. But Bro were able to snowball really well, and here's part of why I like this team's chances with how their early games have been looking. With this patch, where winning the early game and getting first blood, getting feats of strength, controlling objectives early means so much. Getting the opportunity to control the map and get Otacon potentially. These types of things really suit what we saw from Bro throughout the entirety of Kespa Cup. And I think Hambach is, with Shiu, a really strong challengers prospect. Like, you've had a lot of challengers players that got overhyped, like Clear, for example. I wasn't always as high on Clear, but a lot of other people were. I think this guy, Hambach, is the real deal. Like, he was one of my favorite players to watch when I was casting challengers and then co-streaming it later. And the hype is incredible. Like, it's wild to me that like KT just let him go. Obviously he won't be able to play when Bro.
I mean, you say that, but they got Cuz. Like, there's no way he's going to be better than Cuz right now, at least in the short term.
Sure. I mean, but talking about hype, like he is the type of late game AD carry player that you dream of having on your team, kind of like Pace, where if you give him the resources, he will carry, he will pop off. He will get the damage done. And they have Bull as backup, which is weird because, we may only see Bull, like I said, when Bro's playing against KT Rolster, because they're not allowed to play hype against KT Rolster. But Bull is like a very niche type, aggressive. Like, he plays Draven, he plays Kalista, he plays Varus, he plays the I win lane, I win the push, I get those waves stacked on the turret early kind of role, which is kind of the opposite of what Hype is. Hype is a very scaling late game type player, kind of like aiming. So kind of like Pays as well. And so maybe they'll use Bull for some niche drafts, maybe in LCK Cup specifically too, where it's Fearless, where he has like a specific game plan. But it's interesting that they have Bull because he is so the opposite of Hype. So maybe there's some synergy that can come through there, but I think it will be Hype most of the time just because he's such a stronger player right now. I worry about Closer. I worry about Morgan, though.
Do you know why they would loan out Hype, but they wouldn't loan out Hambach? Like, why wouldn't they just keep both of them and loan both of them out?
I don't know. I don't know. Maybe Hambach's contract was expiring. I actually don't know that for a fact. I can kind of try to look that up, but maybe that's what it was. And Hambach was like, I'm out of here. I got a good offer. You guys are getting Cuz anyways. And I don't want to be a lone player. I want to be my own player. Trying to see when his contract expired. Yeah, it expired November 2024, it looks like. So I guess he just was like, yep, I'm moving on. Is my guess. And then they couldn't loan him without re-signing him, which would have been, it just doesn't make sense. So I guess that's what happened. Probably. Closer is the one where I'm like, you got to get your macro together, man, because this team doesn't have a veteran shot caller on it. You know what I mean? Like, there isn't really any element of like Morgan is your veteran. He's going to be the one. I mean, he can, and you listen to the comms, and he often does. But Closer really just needs to figure out how to play side lanes, and if he can do that, then I think this team could.
He is a veteran. If he hasn't figured it out at this point, he's not going to figure it out.
Yeah, I'm worried about him, but I think Bro fans should be excited about the possibility that this team, could make it into the Rise group. or into the legend group. I think they might be able to do it. It's going to be tough, and I'm not saying they're going to do it. But all it takes is Dplus having a bad start, like having a rough start, or bro like really latching on to some of these early game snowballs. I think obviously when we get to the LCK after first stand, the patch and the early game snowballing we're seeing right now won't be a thing. But in LCK Cup, I think this team is a team to watch out for sure. So let's talk about Nongshim. You wanted to talk about Nongshim next, right? This team has Fisher as its mid laner, so I don't know if closer is someone you're worried about. We have to talk about Fisher. Fisher is like maybe a top 3 mid laner 1 out of 10 games. But on the other 9 out of 10 games, he's like
Fisher's trash, man. But the thing is, the rest of Nongshim is kind of surprisingly, like, I don't think the ceiling is very high on Nongshim, but the floor has to be somewhat high. Like, Jiwoo is a very good AD carry, and we saw that last year. Now he's going to be in lane with Lehens. You get Lehens' shot calling. Kingen is not good, but he was, second team, third team All-Pro in summer before he played, badly in playoffs and at the World Championship. But for most of the regular season of summer, he was pretty good.
I think Kingen is good. Like, I think
Kingen is a player that has a high enough floor, right? He has a high enough floor. You have Gideon coming in, who has kind of been bouncing between challengers and the main league at times. Whether he's going to be good enough is I don't know, I think one of the big question marks for this roster. But even just having like Lehens on this roster and Lehens' shot calling certainly makes Nongshim significantly better than they were.
Yeah. No, I think obviously having Lehens and Jiu having this incredibly wide and eclectic champion pool down there could create some really cool drafting. I think Gideon is a pretty good player as well. When kind of unchained, and he gets to play. He's a very similar player to Umpty, and in that his early game aggression sometimes can get you a lead. I'm not saying that he's like a top jungler player. Like, he arguably might actually be the worst jungle player this season, across the LCK anyways. But I don't think he's like unsalvageably bad. Like,
Pioshik exists, Wolf. Pioshik exists.
Yeah, all right. There's also that. But I don't think he's unsalvageably bad, and I think Pioshik is better than him. But consistency wise, he is like Pioshik in that he's not very consistent. So my concern here is, like, how do you set up Jiu's late game carry in this scenario? Or does he just play weird stuff, and like they play Ziggs and they play Neela and they just try to outdraft? Because that could be maybe Nongshim's identity, is there's the team that does weird stuff and it's hard to prepare for them. No LCK team really leans into that identity though, so I wouldn't predict it, but maybe, especially if they're like in the Rise group and they're playing against the other weaker teams, maybe they could really heavily try to hone that and be creative. But I'm not going to predict it. I think that Bro is going to be a stronger team than this team. I believe in hype. I believe in Hambach.
All right, let's talk about DRX, because DRX is another team that went through some pretty good upgrades. UCal is coming back to the LCK after spending several years in China, and people may not be aware of this because UCal did not play on good LPL teams, but UCal was like really good on bad LPL teams. His individual level was quite strong, so it may not seem very exciting that UCal is coming back because you wouldn't have seen him in international competition. You wouldn't have seen him in LPL playoffs. But if you watched some of those games, you would know that, hey, this guy's actually like quite good. So I think it's hype that he's returning. Rich also coming back after his world tour. And, people might shit on Rich, but Rich was, when he was on Dignitas, at one point in time, a contender for MVP of LCS. Like, he was actually quite good for, some of the time he was there. Teddy, longtime veteran, Mr. Reliable. I'm a bit surprised that Andil is the starter, considering that he has had issues maintaining his mental to be in the LCK. And they moved Pleta to the Challengers team when Pleta, I think, is a very promising up-and-coming support player. But when Andil mental booms, at least they'll have Pleta right there waiting to sub in for him. And then Juhan and Sponge, kind of whatever in the jungle position. But DRX as a whole, like, this is what I'm talking about when we talk about the rosters that are in the mid-table or lower table, is like, you might look at this and say, I'm not super excited about this DRX roster. Well, you are much more excited about this DRX roster, and I am too, than you would have been about bottom tier rosters in the past. Because there's hope for this roster.
Every single one of these bottom teams has veterans on them. You know what I mean? Like, it's not just the challengers. It's not just a challengers roster that Nongshim is just like, oh, we're not spending money and here we go. And like, it's not like some of the other rosters we had in the bottom of the table in the LCK over the last 2 years were just like abysmal and hopeless, where you're like, this team shouldn't even be in this region level of bad, right? And now I feel like what we're gonna have is like, you know, some of these teams having these new players or players coming back, but they haven't played in a while. Like, you know, like Juhan might be the starter for DRX, and like he gets emotional when like they almost win a game, but he throws it, and like Rich like is out with him, and he's got his ball of soju, and he's like, first time, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but like,
it's like everyone's seen some shit, you know, on this roster. Like everybody's been through a lot. Yukao has ups and downs, you know. Like this team can figure it out. Like I think they can make some games interesting, especially with the new format.
Yeah. And you must be excited to see Rich back because you're a HOTS caster in the past, and Rich is like the faker of HOTS.
I mean, people always say that, and it's true though. Like he was in Heroes of the Storm, like he played, you know, basically what we called the solo lane, which is, you know, ended up being top lane most of the time, but it's symmetrical map. You could be bottom lane, but he's often his own 1v1ing somebody, which is essentially top lane. How top lane is played in League of Legends. And he was so incredibly dominant mechanically. He also ended up for a time when there was a hyper carry meta where you had like 3 healers supporting 180 carry. Basically, he played 80 carry during that time because he was just so mechanically gifted. Everybody knew he was the best person for the job. He's always had hands. Like he dabbled in Dota for a while when he was playing HOTS. He was just kind of bored of winning HOTS all the time, and he would like be playing. I'd see him in the practice room like playing Dota while the rest of his team is streaming and stuff because he's just like, I don't know, man, I just win everything. It's so easy. But yeah, he's a very talented player, and I think he has struggled a little bit because he's just so far behind in terms of understanding League compared to other players who've been playing it since they were teenagers and trying to go pro. But I think he's really come around, and he's become a more well-rounded player than he was back on his Nongshim and Dynamics days. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he can bring to this roster. Because I think he's, again, a veteran at this point, especially when in terms of esports, right? He's seen a lot of loss. He's been at the top. He's been at the bottom. Those are the types of players like Yukao, like Teddy. He's been at the top. He's been at the bottom. That can really help inspire somebody like Sponge or Juhan, right? Or Andil, who's got, you know, some mental boom issues where he gets super discouraged or gets anxiety. And if you have this roster to be like, hey, Andil, like I've been there, bro, by the way, you know, we can do this. Then maybe this team can grow and improve. Is this team going to Legend? No, absolutely not. But will they make some interesting games, way more interesting than DRX's roster last year? Absolutely, yes.
Well, they also have Song as a coach now, so they have a world championship coach on the roster. So Song comes back to DRX after being on FlyQuest, you know. So this is a roster that I think is interesting and could be fun, honestly.
Yeah. Let's talk about the DN Freecs.
Yeah.
Which
I know you think stands for D's Nuts, but in fact does stand for DN Solutions, which is a Korean company that makes they make manufacturing equipment for machine parts.
Yeah, so my understanding about DN is that they like make all sorts of machine parts, but also they do like technology that you put in your car and stuff like that. Like if you want to set up like the console and like, you know, where the radio goes, basically that kind of thing. It's weird to use the term radio in 2025, but you know, where like you connect your navigation and like those types of things. I think they make parts for that type of stuff. And do the same thing for like shipbuilders, and they're basically this huge company that makes parts for everything that's important in terms of like transportation, is my understanding of them. But they're a huge company in Korea, very massive, and so they have a lot of money. But they're the title sponsor now. I don't know how well being the title sponsor like translates to like esports fans who aren't necessarily going to be buying these
they're
parts.
kind of like a business to business thing where they make machines that make parts for manufacturing.
Yeah,
So I don't know. Wolf, tell me how many you know, are you going to purchase a station to manufacture your own automobile parts as a result of the sponsorship?
I mean, the thing about a lot of these sponsors for esports, you know, is that basically you have like the esports team photo like in the CEO's office, you know what I mean? And once people you have meetings, you're like, oh, I have this esports team. Like it's almost like for a lot of these big rich companies, it's kind of like almost like a hobby to own an esports team, but it also shows that you have a relationship with Riot, right? And that you built this you know, this team. You spent money to like try to like help these young kids out, and it just looks good. Like it's just a good thing to have on your wall. I'm sure everybody's been to like the back room of like you know, a pizza place or something, and you could see like they sponsored the soccer team or whatever, like the little league soccer team, and it's back there, and it kind of shows like, oh, the CEO is a good guy, kind of thing. I think this is kind of like the concept with this. And then obviously you build a relationship with all the other teams and the owners there, and that could lead to business opportunities. And I think there's like a lot of reasons why you would buy a budget roster in the LCK and be it. Well, I mean, they didn't buy it, but they're the title sponsor, right? I think
it probably wasn't very expensive either.
It's still owned by Soup, as far as I understand, because they kept the Freecs branding. But like to be a title sponsor allows you to make a lot of connections with the biggest streaming platform in Korea, Soup, formerly Africa. So there's a lot of ways that you could look at this. It reminds me of in StarCraft Brood War, we had a team called STX Seoul, and they were like a shipbuilding company. So similar type of thing where you're like, yes, like I'm a young StarCraft Brood War fan. I guess next time I need to build a ship, I know who to call. But it's, you know, it's just good for like business reasons, and there's a lot of reasons why you might do that. Kwangdong, similar as a sponsor, but you could actually buy their products as an everyday person because they sell, you know, pharmaceutical stuff that you can buy and health products and things. So a little bit more relatable, but.
And that noise you guys just heard during the recording of this episode was me clicking on Soup, one of the sponsors for Freecs, and of course it opening a live stream as I clicked on the site. So shout out to Soup. You made it into our show. So Soup is one of the newer streaming sites as well in Korea, right? Well, they changed the name.
Yeah, so Soup is basically a rebranding of Africa, which happened after Naver launched their streaming platform Chichizik, which suspiciously happened right after the government ruled with the telecom companies that Twitch needed to pay extra bandwidth.
But Wolf, how could they have known that to launch the new streaming site right at that exact moment? What a strange coincidence that isn't about Korean economic protectionism and you know, monopolies and corporate collusion.
It was a little bit weird when that happened at the same time. But anyway, obviously now we have two competing streaming platforms like Africa or Soup now, which is rebranded. It's a weird rebranding. I'm not going to get into it, but that versus Chijizik, which is Naver, which is basically the main search engine here in Korea, their streaming platform, which hasn't found the success I think a lot of people were hoping for. But yeah, that's still the ownership group, as far as I know, for the Freecs, but they have a new title sponsor. So that's money that goes into the year. We'll see if they stick around for next year or not. Anyway, the roster itself, I'm not that excited about. You know, Dudu's always been a solid top laner. Pyoshik is fine and sometimes clutches, and it was pretty good on KT. But then it's still Bulldog, man, and I think Bulldog. I think Bulldog's in the Cars closer zone where I'm like, I know him now. I seen it. I know he's not just suddenly going to be better. Like I've already seen it.
Well, I told you guys a million times that once teams started banning out his AD carries, he was going to be exposed as a giga fraud because they were only winning games when he was playing AD carries in the mid lane, and it supports his bad laning phase. And Wolf, I don't know if there has been a mid jungle duo that I have been less hyped about than fucking Pyoshik and Bulldog. And by the way, Cuz had to be superhuman on this roster at times to pull out wins. He had to be playing carries, and maybe Pyoshik's like, now's my time to shine with Kindred. I will say one of the upsides potentially is that Life actually did show great map presence on FPX. it really was the Milky Way show in spring, but without Life playing like Rumble bot lane and then just killing people and then walking around the map helping Milky Way wouldn't have looked nearly as good as he did. Life was actually very critical in that, and Life's performances in China were very good. So he actually is a good pickup. Yeah. Now, Berserker's another question mark because Berserker's performance went down the shitter on Cloud9. But I personally think that's because he was entirely demotivated, not that he's like magically a bad player now. So I think he will improve. But I just think the combo of Pyosik and Bulldog is just this black hole in the center of the map. And I am very, very skeptical that they will be able to overcome that. But they have Rapid Star as head coach now. And Rapid Star has never been a head coach before, despite coaching for like a decade at this point in time, coaching in China, coaching in NA, coaching in Korea. And he is an excellent strategic coach. So I'm curious if he will be able to like level up this roster.
Yeah, me too. I mean, they still have fantasy, and like, so that part of the core, like in terms of setting up the players and doing draft coaching and stuff is still there. So Rapid Star's kind of coming into, I don't want to call it like a robust staff, but like it's CV Max has been cut out, right? And he's going to come in and everyone below CV Max might be excited to try something different. And we'll see how this roster performs. As someone who watched a lot more Berserker playing on Cloud9 than I did, would you say that he has a pretty unique champion pool, or does he kind of just play meta? Because that's the big question for me, because Life always does the crazy shit. Like, he always would play, like, Jarvan bottom lane, he played the Rumble bottom lane, like you mentioned.
Well, he was going for kill lanes a lot of the time, because that's how it worked. First off, that was just kind of the meta in spring of last year. But second off, because that's really what was working for FPX. I mean, if you look at Berserker, like, people are going to know him for his Zeri play. He does really well with some of the like late game carries, Zeri, Aphelios, like these champions. It's hard to tell though, because he played his entire career in NA. So when you ask me what he's good at, I'm like, well, he was good at a lot of things, but is he good? Is he Korea good on those things? I don't know.
He's basically, in my mind, like he's basically like a rookie coming into this tournament. Like that's how I look at him. Even though he spent some time, obviously, in North America and has played on stage and is a pro. This is just a different beast, right? And this was like everyone was super hyped about him. Like, oh, is he gonna go to T1? Is he gonna stay in Korea? And then ultimately, there wasn't really a spot for him when he was on the rise. So never got to prove himself in the LCK, and then went to NA. And like NA is just such a weird. You just can't really judge somebody who debuts in NA at all, because you just don't know what they're capable of outside, because there's so many external factors. Like, is my team bad? Am I undermotivated? Is the language barrier? There's just too many question marks. So I want to give Berserker kind of like, at least to me, like a clean slate coming into this tournament.
Yeah. And I think he will be revived by being Korea, because I really believe the slip in his play was due to his motivation being lost, because in the early parts of his time on Cloud9, he was clearly like a cut above almost all the other players in the league, except for, I mean, he was up there with like Prince when Prince first came in, before Prince fell off a cliff. But Berserker has been very consistently good in NA, so I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful.
All right. Well, I guess that's all the teams. We don't have to talk about BNK.
I mean, BNK FearX, man, what a fall from grace from this like Live Sandbox roster that was challenging for Worlds potentially 2 years ago. That, looked very, like a contender at times. What the fuck is this roster, Wolf? Why would you bring Vikla back? Vikla, I understand that Vikla was like rookie of the year on KT, but he was abysmal on FlyQuest. He went to China and was fucking terrible. What blackmail does this guy have to get back onto a starting mid lane spot? Because he didn't just like prove himself in China after he completely shit the bed on FlyQuest and NA. He continued to shit the bed, and now with shit all over his bed, he's on BNK FearX.
Well, look, it says a lot about the state of BNK that they lost closer to Bro, so they had to get Vikla. Like, think about that sentence that I just said, and then like be like, okay, it's an emergency situation now. Diablo in the bottom lane just became eligible to play in the LCK. When I was commentating him in Challengers, I think he was 15.
He's 17, which is a good sign. He's not like a 22-year-old rookie.
Yeah, he's barely eligible to play. He was pretty good when he was 15. You know, like he's one of those players that has a lot of mechanical power built in.
And he has been in the Live Sandbox / BNK system since 2022. So he has spent years in their development system from like their youth, Challengers youth. You know, so they've clearly taken time to make sure that this guy is up to standard and training him. So maybe that's something to be excited about.
I think Diablo, the exciting part about Diablo is what he looks like in 2 years. But right now on this roster, like he's not going to be competitive with the other 80 carries in this league.
Well, I just feel bad for him because he is going to be in lane with infamously silent support player Kellen, who's like, who should we get to help develop this guy? Kellen. I would literally rather see a rookie support than Kellen be this guy's lane partner as a rookie.
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree. I just don't think that bottom lane is a match made in heaven. I think it's very much a, I don't know. It's just going to be a very weak lane. I foresee a lot of incidents down there, accidents, losing flash early at level 1, stuff like that. Just because they just don't, like Kellen isn't a robust engaged support player, and Diablo isn't the type of player that's going to rely on Enchantress supports necessarily or on dominant lanes. Like he's not going to be playing a Renata Draven lane with Kellen to the top level. Let's just say. Vikla looked very impressive when we had the opening match, the kickoff match a few days ago. But that was just like a for fun tournament thing, so I don't want to read too much into it. But he did look like excited to be back in Korea and made
Look,
some.
Man, I'm here for Vikla's redemption arc, man. I thought he was great on KT, but the last couple years have just been really rough for him, and he's been like actually a terrorist on those teams. Like it's not even that he was bad; it was like he was intentionally sabotaging them.
And I mean, like Clear and Raptor are two players that, you know, came up around the same time. Like Clear was in the LCK first as a more mainstay player, but you know, he had his time to shine, and he didn't. And he was very inconsistent and had a few good moments, right? And towards the end of last year, like he was looking a little bit better, but he's just not a strong player, and Raptor is not a player who can really pull this team together. I just look at this team and I go, there's no synergy. There's nothing to be excited about. Every other team, like you said before, like the floor is higher, except this one. This is the team where I'm like, it does look kind of hopeless to me. Like Vikla,
I was Clear's number one. I was Clear's number one hater, and I thought he was a bum, but I actually think he performed pretty well in summer.
Vikla also played really well and got Rookie of the Year in his debut LCK season. If he can channel some of that, he's the only like high floor I see on this team. And Clear, you know, maybe. But otherwise, I just feel like this team, to me, is unfortunately very clearly 10th. I'd be really excited to be surprised by this team. Maybe Diablo ends up being like this rookie player that pops off like Pays and has a great season, but he just doesn't have the tools. He's not set up the same way Pays was. Like it's impossible to even compare the two because he just doesn't have a team around him. So I'm worried about this roster, and I, frankly, even before the LCK Cup starts, I will say, I hope they're willing to make changes to this roster before the LCK and signs.
By the way, Willer is still on the B team. What? Like,
I don't know.
Please put Willer on this starting. Why is Raptor here? I mean, we said this when it happened last year, but like Willer is actually very good and can carry in specific metas. Don't you want that here? Don't we want a carry jungler in this roster?
Yes, I think so. I don't know what's going on with Willer. Obviously, he's underperforming in scrims or something because BNK just doesn't trust him here, even though he was by far their best player and literally carried them to some incredible wins.
It's so weird because at times he was their best player last year, and then they just benched him and sent him to the challengers' mines.
Yeah, I just don't understand it. I mean, from what we can see, it makes no sense. But from what they can see, maybe there's a reason. It
might be an attitude issue or something like that, but it is weird to have Raptor. I mean, Raptor is okay, but I just don't see the same upside that you had with Willer.
Yeah, I hate to say it, but this is the one team where my hope is very, very small. But I think maybe they'll make some roster changes because this roster is basically free. Also, like it's basically free.
All right. Well, we got through all of the teams, Wolf. It's been a longer episode than normal. The matches will start this week, obviously, for the LCK Cup. Be the first time Fearless Draft is used in the LCK, so should be exciting. Anything else people should be looking forward to for the LCK broadcast, Wolf?
I mean, not anything that I can really think of that's like a secret or exciting. If you guys didn't watch the kickoff match, we have a new built-out analyst desk space, as we always call it at the LCK. So that'll be fun for you guys to see. And yeah, I mean, I'm just really hyped for the season to start. It feels like the longest off season of my life, so I'm ready for it. I'm casting on Wednesday. I'll see you guys there.
All right. Well, Monte and Wolf Show will be back next week. Till then.